I write my books in first-person point of view. So in this video, I'm going to break down exactly how first person is used by going through an example and explaining all of the different ways that first person functions so that you can better understand it and learn to employ it in your own story. I made a video on this channel sharing the pros and cons to first person to help you examine whether it was right for your story and make the decision as to whether you wanted to write in first person. But this video is focused on the technical how to write in first person, going through an example in depth, breaking it down, and showing you exactly what the author did and how they were able to utilize first person in order to tell the story in the most effective way. There are some things that first person does that are unique to first person and that are hard to replicate in other points of view. So I'm going to talk about all of that today, and I am excited to dive into it. But before we get started, hello and welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning author who makes videos on this channel sharing actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. I am the author of the 5-book paranormal thriller They Stay series. I published my debut novel when I was 16, and I am a firm believer that every writer is very different, so what works for me is not necessarily going to work for you, and that all I can do as a writer is share the things that work for me and helped me improve my craft, so that you can experiment and try things if you want to and discover what things do fit with your brain and your process. So subscribe if that sounds interesting to you, and without further ado, I'm just going to dive in. If you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you already know what first person is and have made the decision to write a story in first person. If you're interested in learning what first person is and getting a general overview of the pros and cons to this point of view style, I made another video on it, which I will link in the description of this one, but this video is going to be focused on the more technical implementation of first person. So if you are looking for an overview, go watch that other video and then come back to this one if you have decided to move forward and want to write a story in first person. Books written in the first person are told through the eyes of one main character. That character filters everything that happens in the story through their own point of view and shares their point of view with the reader. So the reader, instead of going through the story and being told the story by an objective narrator, like John walked into the coffee shop and took a seat by the window, you would say, I walked into the coffee shop and took a seat by the window. But because a book told in the first person is filtered through the perspective of one protagonist, not only do you get what that protagonist sees and how they see the world, but you also get to experience their experience as they move through the world and get to hear all of their opinions of everything that is going on around them. A good first-person point of view is not an objective point of view. It is meant to be very authentic to one particular character, and that character will show you the world as they experience it, whether it's right or wrong. So I'm going to analyze one of the best examples of a really good first-person point of view, which is the book The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. This book is incredibly well written, it's really voicey, it gets you right into the head of the main character, and does all of the things that you want to do when you're writing a first-person book. So I'm going to go through the first chapter and pick and choose little pieces of it to analyze to illustrate all of the really cool things that you can and should do when you're writing a book in first person. I'm just going to start reading the first chapter. Late in the winter of my 17th year, my mother decided I was depressed, presumably because I rarely left the house, spent quite a lot of time in bed, read the same book over and over, ate infrequently, and devoted quite a bit of my abundant free time to thinking about death. Whenever you read a cancer booklet or website or whatever, they always list depression among the side effects of cancer. But in fact, depression is not a side effect of cancer. Depression is a side effect of dying. Cancer is also a side effect of dying. Almost everything is, really. But my mom believed I required treatment, so she took me to see my regular Dr. Jim, who agreed that I was veritably swimming in a paralyzing and totally clinical depression, and that therefore my meds should be adjusted, and also I should attend a weekly support group. So the most striking thing in this first passage is how strong the voice of this character is. Having a strong voice is really important when you're writing fiction. Your voice is what makes your book special, and what makes your book stand out against other books. Now, voice is a very vague subject, and it's a really difficult piece of criticism to receive if someone says you don't have a strong enough voice in your book, because what does that really mean? So I did make another video really diving into voice that I recommend you go over and watch if you're curious about what voice is and how to work to improve voice in your writing. But voice is one of those nebulous, je ne sais quoi elements to writing that you either have or you don't have, so it makes it tricky to work on, but if you are persistent enough, you can start to hone in on your voice. Voice is not something that is unique to first-person writing, but in first person, you have to use voice in a slightly different way. Because every author has a voice, and writers who write in the third person have a voice that is perhaps close to their authorial voice. But when you're writing in the first person, not only does your voice have to be true to yourself as an author, but it also has to be true to that point of view character. Your point of view character should have a voice that is unique to them. Because when you're writing first person, you as the author are shape-shifting. It is you, the author, who's writing this from the perspective of somebody else, but that somebody else, that character, is the one who is speaking to the reader and telling the story. So we want that character's voice to be the one that shines through, not only your voice as the author. John Green may not be the best example of this because a lot of his main characters have similarities with the way that they speak and the sense of humor that they have that I think very closely mirrors his own. But if you're reading a book narrated by multiple first-person point-of-view narrators, you will find that there are differences in the way that they phrase things and the way that they see the world, and reading one chapter that is narrated by one person is going to feel different than reading another chapter narrated by a different character. So what are the first impressions that we get of Hazel in this passage? Right off the bat, we can tell it's really conversational, but not crazy conversational. Like, you can tell this is somebody that understands almost like they're starting some sort of narration, and they are smart in the way that they're phrasing things, and they're phrasing things almost like they want it to sound formal, like late in the winter of my 17th year is a very formal way of saying that, but what comes next is not very formal. Like, presumably because is very informal, spent quite a lot of time is pretty informal, quite a bit of my abundant free time is informal. And then when you get to the second passage, when you say, whenever you read a cancer booklet or website or whatever, that's another indication that it's a really informal way of narrating. And that's something that somebody would say when they're speaking. Like, cancer is also a side effect of dying. Almost everything is really. The comma really bit makes it sound very informal. But you also get the impression from reading this that the narrator is educated, she's smart. She clearly has a very dry sense of humor because the subject matter is so dark, but she's talking about it in a very lighthearted, not lighthearted, but like dry, humorous tone, like very matter of fact, and clearly it's heavy and clearly it weighs on her, but she is poking fun at it and being snarky about it and not wallowing in the misery of it all, but still uses words like veritably. In this passage, Hazel's also really blunt. It's clear that she doesn't shy away from talking about these really heavy subjects. She uses a lot of irony and dark humor to talk about the heavy things that happen to her. It's really difficult to break down a passage and try to figure out how the author was able to create the voice of a character in that passage, because voice goes into every single word choice and just the order of everything that you say. And I have found that in my quest to try to figure out voice, because I got a piece of feedback about a year ago that my writing wasn't voicey enough, and I couldn't figure out what that meant. I kept trying to figure out how I was supposed to improve on that. I share my findings in my video that I made on voice, so I'm not going to go through all of my findings here because that would take too long. But I did find that there's just no way to fake it, and that you have to practice getting into somebody else's head and staying locked into that person's psyche in order to figure out how to write in that person's voice. It's really tricky. One trick that really did help me was watching videos of my favorite TV characters speaking and then trying to replicate their voice without listening to them and writing something completely unrelated, but writing it in that character's voice. And that taught me how to click into other characters' voices. But this sort of conversational voice and the uniqueness of a voice to a narrator character is something that is pretty unique to first person. And you still get that in third person a little bit, but more so in dialogue, you get unique voices. You get to have more of a narrator voice when you're writing in third person, but in first person, that entire narration has to be in that character's voice. So if you have a character that really loves dry humor, you have to have the dry humor in the actual narration of your book. So let's keep reading. This support group featured a rotating cast of characters in various states of tumor-driven unwellness. Why did the cast rotate? A side effect of dying. The support group, of course, was depressing as hell. It met every Wednesday in the basement of a stone-walled Episcopal church shaped like a cross. We all sat in a circle right in the middle of the cross, where the two boards would have met, where the heart of Jesus would have been. I noticed this because Patrick, the support group leader and the only person over 18 in the room, talked about the heart of Jesus every freaking meeting, all about how we, as young cancer survivors, were sitting right in Christ's very sacred heart and whatever. So here's how it went in God's heart. The 6 or 7 or 10 of us walked/wheeled in, grazed at the decrepit selection of cookies and lemonade, sat down in the circle of trust, and listened to Patrick recount for the 1000th time his depressingly miserable life story. How he had cancer in his balls, and they thought he was going to die, but he didn't die, and now here he is, a full-grown adult in a church basement in the 137th nicest city in America, divorced, addicted to video games, mostly friendless, eking out a meager living by exploiting his cancer-tastic past, slowly working his way towards a master's degree that will not improve his career prospects, waiting, as we all do, for the sword of Damocles to give him the relief that he escaped lo those many years ago when cancer took both of his nuts but spared what only the most generous soul would call his life. And you too might be so lucky. So, in this passage, we get a pretty good idea about how Hazel feels about this entire situation. And that's the next thing that you do when you're writing in first person, is your character, your narrator character, shares their opinions. First person reports the world around the character through that character's eyes. We as the audience don't see things how they are. We see things as the character sees them. A flower could objectively be really beautiful, but if your character thinks it sucks, you have to write on the page that that flower sucks. Hazel, clearly, is not the biggest fan of this support group. She doesn't outright say she doesn't like this support group, but we get that from the narration. Like, grazed at a decrepit selection of cookies and lemonade. Clearly not a huge fan. Listen to Patrick recount for the 1000th time his depressingly miserable life story. Full-grown adult in a church basement. 137th nicest city in the world, what only the most generous soul would call his life. This is not a glowing review on Patrick or his life. Hazel clearly hates it, but there could be another character in this story that we don't hear from at all, but one of the other 6 or 7 kids in this circle who loves this support group, who really looks up to Patrick, who looks forward to seeing the other kids in the support group. Just, for the sake of argument. It could be one of the highlights of their week. They could be really excited to go. They could be over the moon to be there. And if the story were being told from that character's point of view, this would not be the description that we get of the support group. And objectively, the support group might not all be that bad, but because of Hazel and her personal experience, she doesn't want to be there, and so she's giving a really negative description of the support group and of Patrick, who, for all we know, could, by this point of the book, could be a pretty decent guy. So when you're writing in the first person present, you throw in as many opinions as you possibly can. We want, as the readers, to hear how your character sees the world and what they think about it. The objective descriptions of everything don't matter as much. You want to filter everything through the opinions of your character because that's what is going to make them sound like they are a very engaging narrator. If you had a character that just went around describing things exactly as they are, like the curtains are blue, the walls are yellow, the painting has trees in it, it's a landscape. It's a lot more interesting to say that painting is hideous and those people are ugly and those trees look too skinny than it is to just say it's a painting and there are trees on the painting and 2 people on the painting. So when you're writing in the first person, lean into those opinions because it's going to make your prose come to life and make your voice sound more compelling. So now I'm going to read you the passage where Hazel describes herself right after she looks at Augustus Waters and I think makes eye contact with him and then starts to get a little bit self-conscious because he's a cute boy in support group. I looked away, suddenly conscious of my myriad insufficiencies. I was wearing old jeans, which had once been tight but now sagged in weird places, and a yellow t-shirt advertising a band I didn't even like anymore. Also my hair. I had this page boy haircut and I hadn't even bothered to brush it Furthermore, I had ridiculously fat chipmunk cheeks, a side effect of treatment. I looked like a normally proportioned person with a balloon for a head. This was not even to mention the cankle situation. And yet, I cut a glance to him, and his eyes were still on me. So this is very voicey. There are opinions running amok in this paragraph. She has tons of strong opinions about herself and the way that she looks. But also, in this passage, you get a lot of information that the readers wouldn't otherwise get. Like inner information about motivations and thoughts and history that an outside narrator may not be able to dig into. Third person limited, you can get some of this in, but this is an extremely close narration that digs really deep into somebody's psyche, and you don't get this same level of depth in third person limited. So there's tons of information here that you wouldn't otherwise get that's not objective, that's very personal, that only she could provide in her thoughts. A yellow t-shirt advertising a band I didn't even like anymore. Somebody looking at her wouldn't know that she didn't like that band anymore. That's only something she would be able to tell you. Like, I hadn't even bothered to brush it. She is the only one who knows that she didn't brush her hair in the morning. Someone looking at her would just say that it was messy, but she said she didn't brush it this morning. Now, this can be a real strength to first person. It can also be limiting, because while you do get the serious depth of narration and closeness between the reader and your character, your main character can only infer what other people are thinking. You cannot get into anybody else's head. You can only get into your main character's head. So if you're writing in the first person, you want to make sure that that main character has a very interesting head that is, or inner life and inner brain that can carry your entire story, and that you don't need to rely on information from other characters in order to tell the story that you need to tell. So voice, opinions, and inside information are three of the main things that you should pay attention to when you're writing in the first person. Those are the things that really differentiate first person from most other point of view styles, and those are the things that are going to bring your first person narration to life and make it really seem like another full-fledged human being of a character is telling you this story. But this example from The Fault in Our Stars was told in first person present tense, past. So the main character, Hazel, was telling you a story that already happened. Like Hazel says, I looked away instead of I look away. She's recounting something that happened in the past instead of narrating something that is happening right now. I don't write in first person past, I write in first person present. Because when I wrote in first person past tense, I fell into the trap of telling way too much. This is probably because I wasn't voicey enough and I didn't know how to create a voice that was compelling enough to carry a story. But I fell into the trap of the story feeling very much like I'm telling you a story right now instead of showing you the story as it's unfolding. And that's why I switched to first person present tense, because everything just clicked in my head better. A book like The Fault in Our Stars is really engaging, but that is partly because Hazel is a very engaging narrator. And even though she's recounting stuff and kind of telling you the story at the beginning, her voice is engaging and her opinions are engaging enough that you don't get pulled out of the story because of that. Quite the opposite, you get pulled into the story because you just want to hear her talking about her life more. But what I really like about first person present tense is that it adds a lot of urgency to the things that are happening. First person past allowed me to get a little bit too retrospective about the storytelling and pulled me out of the moment. And first person present tense forces me to stay grounded in the moment. So I'm going to read to you a short passage from the second book in my series to illustrate what I mean. This is written in first person present tense. Long grass bends with the wind over by the edge of the labyrinth. The rain is coming down so hard I might as well not be wearing a coat. Francesca, I call, scanning the tree line. Francesca, where are you? I'm standing alone by the telephone pole that marks the center of the field. I figured this would be the best place to stand because here Leonard will see me no matter which direction he comes from, and I'm going to look like an easy target. Miles and Jonah are hanging back, hiding near the mouth of the trail and waiting for Leonard to take the bait. The bait being me. Francesca, I scream even louder. I'm here to rescue you. Snap. I whip around, but it's just the wind breaking off a naked, spindly branch. First person present puts you right in the moment with the character. Right now, this character doesn't know if the outcome of the scene is going to be good or bad. You as the reader are right there with them as they experience the things that happen in the scene, which to me makes it more exciting. But I also write thrillers and mysteries, which is a different genre from The Fault in Our Stars, and first-person present tense would not work as well as first-person past does in that book. But all of the same things apply to a first-person present tense. You still want it to be voicey, you still want the characters to share their opinions, and you get to still reveal all these things that readers might not otherwise get to know about your characters and their situation. So that's it for my in-depth analysis on first-person present tense and how it's used in prose. I hope that video is helpful. I know that I wasn't able to go into serious depth about voice, but that's because it's such a huge subject, and I spent a lot of time writing and working on my voice video, so I say everything a lot better in that video, and I recommend go checking that out if you want to learn more about voice. If you have a second, I'd be super grateful if you could like this video and also subscribe to my channel. Do you like writing books in the first person? Have you written a story in the first person? If so, do you like writing in past tense or present tense? And do you have any tips for how you learned to write in the first person effectively? If you do, pop them down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. There is so much more to writing in the first person than simply just changing the tenses. It's a completely different style and artistic form of writing. I love writing in this tense so much, so I would love to commiserate with other people who share my love for it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic week, and as always, happy writing. I hope you have a fantastic week, everybody, and as always, happy writing.